Take us away, Natalie.
Imagine if I just did a really slow intro. Welcome back to Unleash the
God.
Goats, where we unleash ourselves.
ASMR.
I hate this. Welcome back to
continue.
Unleash
It
the
was
Goats.
good.
I'm not gonna do it. It's too much. I can't do the slow like ASMR. We're wasting time. Welcome back to Unleash the Goats, where we unleash ourselves upon the Star Wars franchise with reckless abandon, and nobody quite knows what we'll say next, least of all us. I'm Nat, she, her. Angela, say hi.
Hi, I'm Angela /Faye, she, her.
Sugar, say hi.
Hi, I'm Sugar, she, her.
Okay, today is part 2 of our villains.
Not all roads lead to Anakin.
Not all roads lead to Anakin. Sorry, Faye.
For the record, beautiful listeners and readers, I have the most beautiful piece of merch. That is the only piece of merch that exists so far. Because Sugar had a shirt made for me that says, all roads lead to Anakin on the front. On the back, it says, not everything is about Anakin.
And it's not for sale. It's just for you.
It's not for sale.
No.
But I want you to know that I own it.
Made because she said she wanted one, to be fair. It wasn't made totally on a whim.
You can take credit
But yeah.
for that, Sugar. It's fine.
Sure, yeah.
I was going to wear it, but I'm not in my apartment, so I don't have it. Sorry.
With that said, so we're going to go over basically just a bunch of antagonists and some villains who, unlike the last month's episode, don't really have any connection to Anakin specifically, and don't really seem to follow a lot of the themes that Anakin's story had. But they're still there. Sometimes they're fun, sometimes they're less so. We will include as many as we can. There's a lot of villains in Star Wars. Most of these are going to be perhaps a little bit more minor, more cult favorite sort of characters. But yeah, so the difference between an antagonist and a villain, because we're including both, is that an antagonist opposes the protagonist, whereas villains are usually considered morally wrong. Some antagonists might become a protagonist in a different story. Some villains might be protagonists of their own story. It really depends. We're sort of being a little bit loosey-goosey with our inclusion. We're doing both antagonists and villains. We're usually not going to be discussing these characters if they become protagonist within that section of their story. So characters, for example, like Boba Fett, we're not really going to discuss his appearances in things like the Mandoverse, because he's a protagonist and a hero in that, and so it isn't really relevant to our discussion here. But we are going to jump right in with the sequel trilogy, actually. So
We're going backwards this time, folks.
Sure, yeah, we're bouncing around a little, but we're starting at the end. Going right in with Snoke. I don't think he ever had a title other than that.
Terrible.
Yeah, Andy Serkis's second best performance in Star Wars.
His worst performance in Star Wars.
His worst performance. To be fair,
It's not his fault.
To be fair, it's a perfectly good performance, but
That's fair.
his
His worst character in Star Wars?
worst character in Star Wars. Yeah, it was ultimately a waste of Andy Serkis's skills, both just regular acting and in performance character acting. Yeah, there's not a lot to say about Snoke other than he is kind of a really big wasted opportunity, a big mystery that got introduced as one of J.J. Abrams' mystery box kind of things that didn't really end up going anywhere thanks to The Last Jedi.
He's a big, shiny gold toy that no one knew what to do with, or they threw it away.
Yep.
Moving on.
Moving on. Next up from the sequels also is Phasma, who, instead of being a big gold toy that no one knew what to do with, we have a big silver toy that no one knew what to do with. She's such a cool aesthetic concept, I think. You know, the female, like, stormtrooper, but in, like, bright, shiny armor. Like, there's a lot that I really loved about that. You know, that they did not sexualize the armor with boobies.
Also, Gwendolyn Christie is just...
Yeah, Gwendolyn Christie is great, obviously. So there's a lot that was kind of interesting aesthetically about her. I don't love that they brought her back. I think it was a little ridiculous that they brought her back after she was already defeated once. I think that sort of defeats the point of defeating her the first time. Which, I mean, Last Jedi did a lot of that, so we'll skip over that a little bit. But also, there's a lot of villains in the sequels. You know, we've got Phasma, Hux, Snoke, and Kylo all within there, and it's like some of these villains just end up feeling a little superfluous. And I think Phasma kind of landed in that category for me, that like she's cool to look at, but I don't know that she added a lot to the story.
The only thing I'll say for her is that they did use her to give Finn something to do once in a while, which was nice, to have him not be completely useless, because they just don't know what to do with him in The Last Jedi. So there's that. Like, she's like, there's like some interesting stuff between them, kind of.
Yeah, although to be fair, I feel like Last Jedi likes to repeat things that The Force Awakens already did. And so, like, they already have Finn defeat Phasma, and so she does exist as this, like, kind of first obstacle for him, right? As a villain who is much more directly related to him, that he takes down at the end of the Force Awakens when he goes back, and he gets to sort of, throw that in her face, and then they do it again, and it's like, we've already had this confrontation. Like, it doesn't really add anything to Finn's character or Phasma's to do it twice, to my mind. But yes, it within the context of The Force Awakens, Phasma is there to be a character for Finn to defeat, and to kind of give a certain amount of closure to his time as a stormtrooper, and let him kind of gains a certain amount of confidence from being able to defeat her.
She's hot. I will say that. Dharma might not be sexualized, but she is sexy.
Yeah, like I said, she was very, very nice aesthetically. The performance was fine. Obviously, Gwendolyn Christie is a perfectly good actress, so there was nothing wrong with the performance. Much like with Snoke, the problems lie more in the writing than they do in
it's very common in Disney Star Wars, is a lot of the problems are in the writing and not the actors.
Yeah, sometimes it's the acting. Or the directing. There's been directing issues too.
Yeah, for sure.
This because in the sense of, like, it's not all about Anakin, but we're going to talk about him anyway. This feels very different than, like, I feel like the last episode, it was just like, this is our theme, and we're going to keep revisiting it. And, like, here is good versus evil. But Phasma over here is just like, we did it in exactly the same way the second time. And it's like, that's not really the vibe. Like, there's a good way to do that, and we've seen it before, and this isn't it.
I mean, they could have done it in an interesting way where, like, oh, you have to keep fighting fascism because it keeps coming back.
Yeah.
That's not what they did, but they could have done something like that where, like, oh, you think you beat me, but actually fascism is back and better more all the time. Like, we thought we beat the Nazis and now they're back. They could have done something, but no, they did not.
And I feel like, we're kind of straying away from our theme a little bit here, but, like, what I would have preferred to have, obviously you need a conflict, right? You need them to have a villain group to fight against in the sequels, but, like, I want it to be less about fascism's always going to come back and more about sort of the cycle. I did this
the sign
shape that's more of a pentagram, but, like, in the beginning, it's like we had an evil coming up in the government that, like, they were unable to defeat, and then you get to see them all come together when it's at its most powerful and defeat it then, because it's like, we're just taking down the big bad because we've got no more options. And it would have been really nice for the sequel trilogy to do something more like, we're in the same place as we were at the beginning, we've got a good central government now, and the evil is just starting to come back, but this time we've learned from the mistakes of our past and aren't going to let it, corrupt us again. So fascism always comes back, but we can learn from our mistakes and defeat it before it defeats us this time. And that's kind of where I wanted it to go. And so you could have done something with that to kind of bring the cycle full... Not doing this. I'm sorry, y'all. It's 9:30 in the morning, my time.
Sugar's up so early for us.
Bring it around full circle.
Yes.
Would have been where I wanted that to go. And with that, we will move on now to Armitage Hux.
Hux! Oh my god, Hux.
Our final of the sequel trilogy villains that really had absolutely nothing to do with Anakin. I called him...
Kylo Ren's boyfriend.
Okay.
Yeah. We did talk about him briefly in our queer episode. If you remember, this was, what was it, the most, like the queer couple with the most fics on AO3. Was that it?
Top queer ship in the Star Wars fandom, everybody.
Yeah,
Top
on
queer
Archive of
ship.
Our Own, at least. I called him the Tarkin of the sequel trilogy, which we'll discuss Tarkin a little bit more later. This is arguable, but basically just because he's kind of like the basic Imperial officer within, especially within The Force Awakens, so he kind of feels like Tarkin, but he does not die at the end of his first movie. He lasts a while. So he doesn't serve the purpose that Tarkin serves in other ways.
I'd also say he's a lot more volatile than Tarkin. Like, Tarkin's, like, very controlled and old and, like, good at his job. And Hux is over here just, like, really ambitious and striving and conniving his way through the
ranks.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, he is. He's really ambitious, which does create this interesting dynamic with Kylo and Snoke, where, like, he is trying to get Snoke's approval just as much as Kylo is, and this puts them at odds, and he doesn't really think that Kylo's very good at anything, which is actually delightful to watch sometimes.
Honestly, if they'd done more with him, he would have been funny.
Oh, and, like, Donald Gleason fucking loved playing this character, you
Yeah.
know, and, like, making him feel unhinged and kind of crazy. And I can appreciate that he was clearly kind of having fun with his character most of the time. But, again, there are just a ton of villains in the sequel trilogy, and it does start to feel a little too much. Oh, you know, he gets a little forgotten about because there are kind of some other bigger characters that end up taking more attention.
I do love it when he turns spy, though. That's fucking hilarious. It's so funny. I don't care if it's out of character. At that point in the movie, I was just like, fuck it, whatever. I don't care.
It's very funny because by the time you reach the Rise of Skywalker, who the fuck gives a shit what they're doing anymore? Everything's been turned on its head. There's no themes anymore. There's no consistency to anything. So it's like, sure, fine, whatever. He might as well do that.
Yeah, he obviously hates Kylo Ren. Why wouldn't he betray him?
I guess.
Whatever.
You know, it's like, whatever. Like, Hux is a character who I think mattered so little they could kind of just do that with him. Just be like, sure, yeah, he's going to turn, you know, traitor because he hates Kylo Ren enough, and we need this plot point to happen.
Yeah.
So is he a particularly well-written character? No. You know, but he exists, and he's probably the least objectionable of our three sequel characters we're talking about today.
Let's move on from the sequels.
And we're going straight into the prequels by starting with Jango Fett. And we are just going to combine it with Boba Fett because he obviously does exist within the same context. Jango obviously is a little bit more of an obstacle than a villain. In a lot of ways, Dooku is kind of the main thematic villain within this Attack of the Clones, but he doesn't show up until the last, 30 minutes of the movie. So they spend most of the time chasing after Jango, and we do see him pop up more than once. He has, 2 fights with Obi-Wan across the course of the time that he's on screen, as well as a fight against Mace that he loses. So he's actually in quite a lot of this movie as a villain and an antagonist.
He does feel it does feel very much like, oh, the fights are here because the fights are cool. And it's more to me as a casual fan, it feels more like he's there as an extension of Dooku and not really as his own. We don't see a lot about why he's okay with being cloned so many times to build this army.
Right, there's no motives behind. I believe it is explained that he was paid in a child, effectively. That his payment for being the clone model or whatever was Boba. That was the agreement made, was that he was like, sure, yes, I will do that, but you give me one.
That's so sad he doesn't get to raise that
why
kid.
did he want a child?
He does for 10 years.
Yeah.
He doesn't get to after that, but he does get to raise Boba for 10 years.
Sorry, Jango.
But we don't really get any insight as why that's important to him, why he really wants a clone of himself, so much so that he's willing to have his own face running around the galaxy 2 million times.
Face, to be fair,
it's a wonderful.
It is a
face
gorgeous
to be running
face.
Around. But yeah, Jango is a very 2D character. There's not a lot to him in terms of his motives, and I think that's where you're getting the feeling that he's just an extension of Dooku, right? That like this is Dooku's evilness sort of coming out into the galaxy and starting to spread, and kind of much like Maul is that for Palpatine, that he is, you know, an extension of that, and just the piece that they're able to see is kind of a continuing theme that Jango is that for Dooku as well. And of course, through Dooku, by extension, he is also an extension of Palpatine as well. That this is the Sith's darkness spreading through the galaxy. There is no, and because we don't know his motives, there's no indication in the films that he's ever been a better person than this.
Yeah, there's like some legend stuff about like, oh, like he's actually like the true king of Mandalore and all that shit, but like none of it's really canon. A lot of it's decanonized. It's very patchwork backstory, depending on, like, you can kind of interpret him any way you want, depending on what you want to believe.
Right. And, like, I think in Legends 2, he used to be a slave, you know, he had this connection to being Mandalorian. He was adopted, he was supposed to be, which has been recanonized within Disney canon, that he was foundling, I think is the word they use, right? But, and so he has a certain amount of sympathy added to him within Legends canon, but, you know, take it or leave it. The films don't include it, so he's an interesting character depending on how you choose to interpret him, but he is also a fairly flat character within the original context. But
I mean, so is Boba Fett in the original movies. Like, he's just like a faceless suit of armor. Like, he's cool, but like he's cool because you can kind of project onto him a little bit, not really so much because he actually has personality or motives beyond money. He just wants to get paid.
Yeah. Well, and much like Phasma too, I think he's interesting because he's aesthetically interesting, not necessarily because there's anything about him that's thematically interesting as a character.
I mean, the little chin chuck he does in the Jabba Palace that like was a meme for a second, that was hot. But like, beyond that,
even that feels more aesthetic than it does anything else. That it's a little like, oh, he's sexy. Like, people like the armor and it's sexy, and so we're just gonna let him kind of let the other characters react to him in universe the way the fans were, more than it was saying anything about him as a character. And also, then he dies like a chump like 10 minutes after that.
Yeah, that's true. But a lot of people died, and then he didn't die, so it was fine.
Yeah, but he's built up as this like wonderful bounty hunter, and then he dies in the most loser possible way.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, it's not a missed opportunity. This was so fucking intentional because Lucas despised Boba Fett.
Yes, Lucas missed an opportunity to do something cool with a character, like a cool armor. That's very cool. Do something with them, make them a cool person. But Boba Fett's just kind of like there.
He is, but the reason Boba Fett exists alone is because that armor was not supposed to be existing alone. They made that armor to be a new kind of stormtrooper. It was supposed to be a new cool kind of stormtrooper. There wasn't supposed to be a character attached to it, but they only had the money to make one.
They said, we can't let this go to waste.
They did. They'd already made it. It existed. So they were like, well, fuck it. We made this really cool armor. We do not have more money to make more of them the way you would need to. So they just made this bounty hunter character with this armor. And that's Boba Fett. So, like, Boba Fett as a character exists without a lot attached to him because he really is his armor in so many ways. And he wasn't really supposed to be anything else. But
like a true Mandalorian.
Yeah. But fans latched onto that and just kind of went with it.
I mean, he gets a whole short in the holiday special, which everyone has seen, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Okay, we did watch that together, actually.
Listen, I have no memory. I'm the best person to rewatch with, because I won't remember shit.
You're not going to remember shit. It's fine. We'll do an entire episode about it in a few months. You'll remember all over again.
I think the one thing I will add about Boba Fett is that I feel like his only character trait outside of the original, and I'm sorry, I'm rewatching them, it's just very slow. I haven't gotten to him yet. Is that, like, in the prequels, like, his only character trait is that he is attached to his father. Like, he's listening to his dad when in the fight with Obi-Wan, and, like, clearly proud of himself when they appear to have beat him. Which you could say is, like, unsympathetic and like, oh, he's like a little bit evil, but you also could argue that like he's just following what his dad is telling him to do and not thinking about the morality of that. And then obviously when Jango is killed, like he has the very sweet moment with his helmet, and like that's it. The only thing about him is that he has a relationship with his dad, who we didn't learn anything about. So that's the end.
I mean, I would put that into a characterization for Jango, though, is like he generally does seem to care about Boba and is trying to be a good parent to him. So, like, that is a characterization.
They don't do much with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, it doesn't, like, really, which I actually kind of like. I like that it doesn't make him, like, a better person to be a good father. He just is a good father, and he's also a villain. Like, we don't know a lot about his motives or anything like that. We know that he is kind to his son and, like, is raising him not to be a good person, but like he is raising him to have a positive relationship with him. But he also sucks. Like he also is fine with murder and like all this other stuff. Like I don't know, I like it. It's cool.
Yeah. So the Fets are there. All right, we are on Callus. Do we want me to rant for a couple of minutes about Callus?
Hey, Sugar, who's Callus?
Go ahead, take your time.
All right, so as the
Callus?
only person here
Tell
who has
us.
seen Rebels, I'm going to go on a couple minutes rant about Alexander Callus and the stupidest redemption arc in the history of Star Wars. Which is going to get me a little bit of hate from certain areas of the fandom who believe it was the best redemption arc in the history of Star Wars. But basically, Alexander Callus is the primary antagonist within the first season, in particular, of Rebels. There's a couple of others in there. The Grand Inquisitor was introduced within this season as well. And then there's the other Inquisitors that come in within Season 2. But about halfway through Season 2, there's an episode with Callus and one of the Rebels ensemble characters, his name is Zeb, where they get stuck in an ice cave, and Callus goes through an entire retconned redemption arc within the course of this one 20 to 30 minute episode. Part of the backstory it is important to know about Callus is that when he is introduced, they make it very, very clear very early on that Callus led a genocide against Zeb's entire species. And as far as we are aware, Zeb is the last one in existence. Callus also carries around what appears to be a weapon of one of Zeb's people as something of a trophy. He uses it to taunt Zeb. He laughs at Zeb's pain over this genocide. He is clearly gunning to kill Zeb so that he can basically finish the job. This is a massive part of Callus's character as he is introduced to us. Skipping right back ahead then to that episode about halfway through Season 2, it is revealed that, wow, he didn't actually lead that genocide. He was a part of it. They don't completely eliminate it, but he didn't lead it. This was a lie that he told, just to, like, fuck with Zeb a little bit more, apparently. But that it was someone else's idea, and Callus was basically just willingly going along with it. Somehow this is supposed to make it a little bit better. Unclear. Also, the weapon that he stole, not a trophy, but apparently a gift given to him as an honorable warrior who defeated one of Zeb's people, that this is part of their culture, and he is just using it because it's the honorable thing to do, to keep using a weapon given to you by a warrior of the people you helped genocide, apparently.
Well, it had a +2 stat, Sugar. Obviously, he wasn't going
He
to stop
looted the
using
body and had to use it. I don't know why we're pretending that's not what happened.
He didn't loot the body, according to the retcon. It was given to him while the guy was still alive. He was just
I really don't
dying.
believe the retcon.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah, there's some questionable aspects to this retcon. Other fun things that happen in this retcon is that there was a lovely little All Lives Matter thing tossed in, where Zeb is accused of basically having the same problems that Alice does because he judges all Imperials to be evil.
Okay.
We cannot... Okay, let's move on. We cannot get into that. That's wrong. Next.
Right, so the reason that comes up, I did miss this part, the reason that comes up is because the explanation given for why Callus decided to willingly participate in a genocide is because when he was a little baby Imperial and was sent out with his squad at one point to effectively attack a group of, I think it's Saw Gerrera's rebels specifically, he doesn't. His squad does not find Saw Gerrera's rebels. They only find one rebel, who was left behind basically to kill them and keep the rest of the rebels safe. This rebel happened to be one of Zeb's species, and he does manage to kill everyone else in Callus's squad. For some reason, Callus survives. How he survives is left a little unclear. But from this point on, he has decided every person in that species is evil, because one of them killed his Nazi squad mates. And therefore, so this speciesism is then equated to Zeb disliking and judging every Imperial. Yeah.
Boo!
That is where...
So obviously you're born an Imperial.
Yeah. We don't see Callus again, I think, throughout the entirety of Season 2, but when he comes back in Season 3, he is starting to help the Rebels crew every so often. At the beginning, he claims that he's doing it effectively to be even with Zeb. And then by the end of it, it's revealed that he's completely churned around. He has been spying for the rebellion as an inside man, and by the end of Season 3, he's found out and he has to leave, and he is officially one of the rebels by the end of it. And then in the little epilogue of Rebels, they have Zeb take Callus to the secret planet with all of the survivors of his species. And is like, look, Callus, you didn't kill all of them. I can't tell you how much I despise this moment. I cannot handle it.
That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Callus is the worst. The retcon stinks. It's the worst redemption in the history of Star Wars, and that is the rant on Callus.
Good job, Sugar.
Oh my god. Okay.
Moving on.
Let's talk about Thrawn, because we have positive things to say.
I like Thrawn, anyways. Thrawn is introduced in Legends, and he's pretty... I mean, people overhype him, I would say, for sure. But he is pretty cool, because they do, like, a thing where he's like, I'm going to interpret you based on the art history, because I've studied your planet. And, like, that is kind of fun. It's very fun to be like, I'm going to make this art history major into a villain. Like, that's kind of funny. I am also a little bit disappointed when I found out that the guy who wrote these books didn't have an art history major, because I thought that would be hilarious.
I was going to say, not an art major?
Yeah. I thought that would have been funny, but, you know.
Knew shit all about art.
Yeah, but he's cool. He's, like, a major villain for, like, 3 books, and then he gets his own spin-off books, and, like, there is, like, a slightly interesting aspect to the fact that he is a blue-skinned, red-eyed dude in the Empire and has risen to quite a high rank in an empire of mostly white humans. So, I mean, there is that, which I think they don't really work on a lot. It's, like, mildly mentioned a little bit in the first books.
They do more.
And then there's more in the later
more in
books.
his spin-offs.
Yeah, he gets the
his
spin-off
Disney
ones, and they play with that more. But he's cool in those. They don't really do much fun with stuff with him in, like, the Disney stuff so far, like Rebels and Ahsoka. He's pretty much just...
I met him for the first time in Ahsoka, and I went, he's blue? And Sugar and Faye were like, you didn't know he was blue?
One of those things we forgot to mention when we were sitting there having conversations about Thrawn in the Discord server. Oh yeah, he's blue. Yeah, so I think the reason that Thrawn feels kind of boring sometimes in Rebels and Ahsoka is because he is based off the Legends version, in which he is a pretty flat 2D villain. Like, you know, he has his art thing. I'm putting quotes around the art thing because it really is just like, he'll be like, I'm going to completely defeat this person. And they go, how did you do this miraculous thing? Art. And then they move on. There's zero explanation for this beyond art, which I found absolutely despicable. I'm like, if you're going to give him art history as, like, his secret superpower, I need you to do a little bit more with that. Like, you can't just say art every time and move on and expect that to be interesting or believable.
Sugar wanted there to be more art. She wants there to be more art. And I agree with her. I think it would have been more fun if he'd been like, yeah, the way that they make their teacups indicates this about their personality. And also, this history indicates they have a history.
In fairness, this does happen once or twice.
Yeah.
Like, there's a thing where he, like, does a thing through the light, and he's like, oh, these people are, like, colorblind, and I know this because of their art that they're colorblind, and so I know that they're not going to see this thing or that I'm doing. And so there every so often there is an explanation as to why he knows.
Yeah, there should be more.
There should absolutely be more. But there's not. Like, 9 times out of 10, the explanation is just, well, I studied their art, and then you move on. Which I found infuriating. Rebels and the Ahsoka show, to some degree, follow the same concept of Thrawn is a very flat villain. Like, his motivations are basically just, I want to watch the world burn. Effectively, there's not a lot else to it. Like, he's just fanatically loyal to the Empire, even after it's gone. So there's not a lot, like, to him. In Rebels, though, he is given... Weirdly enough, he's, like, the primary villain, but his biggest interaction is with Hera, who is at best your third in line in terms of main characters, as opposed to, like, Ezra or Kanan, who is what most of the other villains have been connecting to the most. But, like, Thrawn's biggest rivalry is with Hera, which means that he's a very awkward villain in Rebels because he doesn't connect to your main character almost at all.
He's mad she's green. He wants to be the only colored bitch on the show.
Yeah. To be fair, Zeb is also purple, so it's not like Hera is even the only colored bitch on the show. But, like, he's got this, like, respect thing going sometimes, too, occasionally. One of the things that does exist, I will say, in the Legends version of Thrawn that does not exist in Rebels or Ahsoka is this sort of, like, interesting relationship he has with his underlings, where he is generally respectful of the people who work under him, and he gains their respect in return. He doesn't end to rule on fear. And that's not something that's explored, I think, in Rebels or Ahsoka very much.
Faye, do you want to tell us about the Night Sisters?
I would love to tell you about the Night Sisters. Okay, so first I'm going to tell you what the Night Sisters are, and I'm going to tell you how George Lucas ruined them because he sucks. Which is not to say that George Lucas always sucks. It's just in this particular instance, everybody. I want you to know. He made a bad decision, and I don't like him for it. Okay.
For context, every so often, Lucas does take shit out of Legends and inserts it into his own canon, but he usually is not particularly respectful of what he is taking out of Legends. He might like the name or the concept, and then will do his own fucking thing with it. You see him do this everywhere.
Filoni does the same fucking thing, and it's my least favorite thing about him. It's so obnoxious. Like, if you want to do it right, or don't do it at all. Anyways, so the Witches of Dathomir were created for not really an antagonist, but like a force to be reckoned with in the Courtship of Princess Leia, which the author wrote because he was like, oh, they're married in this book? That seems fast. Let me write a book about why they get married so quickly and like how that like came to be. Like, let me bridge the gap here a little bit, which I think is a good idea because they did need that. This book does include Han kidnapping Leia. In fairness, she was kind of being mind controlled already when he kidnaps her with the mind control gun, but he didn't know that. So he has to make up for the rest of the book, and Chewie almost kills him for it. So it's not like he gets off scot-free kidnapping Leia. So there is that. But that's not really important. The important part is the Witches of Dathomir, who are this really cool group of pretty much all female women because they believe that men can't use the Force, which is very funny. And they are started by an exiled Jedi Knight named Alia, I believe. And she was exiled because she was doing dark shit. And then in her exile, she like kind of came back to herself and like stayed a light person. And on the planet she was exiled, she formed this group of women and taught them how to use the Force and uses the Force to tame rancors, and they ride them, and it's cool as shit. Boba Fett did not do it first. The Witches of Dathomir did it first, and fuck George Lucas for taking that away from me. Also fuck Disney, just in general. Anyways, they're awesome. They're so cool. They have like a bunch of different clans and stuff. They have like a thing where men are their slaves, but it's kind of like a weird consensual thing because the men are into it, and like if they're not cool with the woman who like owns them, the women will just like sell them to somebody else that they want to be owned by. It's confusing and weird, and was written in like the 90s. So, but the important part is that the Night Sisters are kind of like the evil clan. So like the way that the Night Sister, the witches of Dathomir work is that if they have a member of their people who is using what they call night spells, essentially dark magic, then they exile them. And they can come back and like visit, but they are exiled from the clans. The problem is that they exile enough of them, the exiled people get together and then make their own little evil clan called the Night Sisters because they use night spells. You know, it kind of works. They're kind of antagonists. There is some like ambiguity there because then they start having kids and like the kids are raised in this culture, so it's not really their choice. That is kind of where the Zabrak thing comes in the Clone Wars, is that a slave ship full of Zabrak prisoners crash lands on the ship, and the Night Sisters are the ones who find them and make them into their male slaves, and that's where the Dathomir race comes from, is they're like Zabrak human hybrids. They're cool. But that's more of like a Clone Wars thing, and like it gets retconned into the Dathomir sisters. So there are people in the courtship of Princess Leia who are later retconned into being Dathomir race, but they were initially supposed to be human. It's cool. Honestly, they're awesome. And then when they got into the Clone Wars, they were like, what if we took the name and nothing fucking else, and we just made them evil? And there's no cool witches over here. They're just like evil Night Sisters, and that's it. And for some reason, the Jedi are chill with this. It made more sense when the Jedi were chill with the witches of Dathomir, who were just like chill and hanging out and doing magic spells and living normal lives. But for some reason, the Jedi are super chill with the evil Night Sisters just hanging out and doing dark magic and shit. But they're not really that evil in the Clone Wars evil. Like, they have the name, the Night Sisters, but they're not really that evil for the most part. So it's just very confusing and doesn't make sense, and the lore is just kind of like all jumbled together, and I hate it. I hate it a lot. I think it's stupid. I don't like that they are so important so much now, because none of them make sense, and they're not even consistent within Disney itself. Like, they're evil half the time, and then when they're not evil, there's no reason why they're not evil, and there's no reason why they are evil when they are evil. Like, there's no reason the Night Sisters should be helping Thrawn get back to the galaxy. Like, they don't have any motivation to do that. And it doesn't make any sense that they're even in this galaxy to begin with. What are they doing there and not in Dathomir? Whatever. So, that is the Night Sisters. They're cool. Sometimes.
Yeah. So, within Clone Wars, I feel like they weren't there to be their own thing. Like, they are their own thing, but, like, the entire arc where they're introduced really is there to, like, it reintroduces Maul into the story by the end of it. Like, there's this whole thing with Ventress's backstory, and it's more about her than it is about the Night Sisters, and then Maul is introduced at the end, and then, like, everyone else gets ignored. I feel like the Night Sisters are really just there as a vessel to bring Maul back to life, rather than as a thing that they really wanted to explore on their own.
They just want to use them to give people cool magic points, and, like, make them a little more mystical, and, like, not actually create more of, like, a world building. Also, when they did the episode with the Night Sisters, they did not credit Dave Wolverton for his work on creating this entire world. Like, they stole the names of all his shit, and then they didn't credit him until people were like, hey, you stole all this shit from this book. Why aren't you crediting him in the credits at all? And, like, after, like, a bunch of backlash, they finally, like, I think there is, like, a tiny little credit, like, oh, original ideas by Dave Wolverton. But he actually passed away a couple years ago, so R.I.P. Dave Wolverton. You did a great job. We appreciate you.
I'm sorry that your work is being butchered.
I'm really sorry about that. I hope that you died before Ahsoka came out.
The only thing I've read of Dave Wolverton's was the very first Jedi Apprentice book, and I find that it is easily the worst written of all of them.
It's my favorite one.
The first Jedi Apprentice book?
Yeah, I like it more. I don't like any of Jude Watson's writing, so...
I know, you hate Jude Watson's writing, but, like, I could not, like,
Besties.
It's so repetitive.
Besties, we can't do this. Sugar, do you want to tell us about the Jedi Fallen Order?
We can
Night
start with
Sister
Rebels,
stuff?
since that chronologically came first.
Okay.
But again, they are really just there to provide creepy stuff. Like much like in Clone Wars, they're not really there to be explored. They're there basically just to be creepy and do witchy things. And also the Night Brothers, which are the Zabrak male half of the island appear to no longer be there. They're not there anymore. They're gone.
Goodbye.
We don't know what happened to them. Also, quick explanation for people who haven't seen Clone Wars. The Night Sisters got completely genocided during the Clone War. So they are all supposed to be dead.
Except
aside from Ventress herself. There's been a couple of survivors who have been revealed since then, but within the context of Clone Wars, the only survivor of the Night Sister massacre is Ventress herself. So by Rebels, there were no... I think by the time Rebels came around, there were no survivors that had been revealed yet. So there's absolutely nobody left on this planet. But we never see anyone murdering the Night Brothers, and yet they are gone.
We didn't need them anymore.
There they go.
We'll just ignore them.
Yeah, we'll just ignore them. So then we hit Jedi Fallen Order, which is where we meet our first Night Sister survivor, and this is Merrin. You might remember Merrin from the last episode where we talked about her. I'm mostly going to be discussing the way Fallen Order kind of added to the lore of the Night Sisters within the context of Lucas and Disney canon, and not Merrin herself, but she is an antagonist at the beginning of the game. But this is the first time, Merrin is the first time that, like, a Night Sister character also ends up becoming, like, a protagonist, a heroic character. By the end, she is Hal's love interest in the second game, kind of thing. So there's a lot of nuance that gets added to the Night Sisters. Merrin is implied to have been a youngling, a child when the genocide happened, which is potentially why she survived, because they kind of were able to get her somewhere safe. And that's why she has made it out. She does seem to still have a connection to the Night Brothers, that they will listen to her. She's got a lot of magic, which obviously at the beginning starts off pretty creepy because it's creepy witch stuff that they're dealing with on Dathomir. She is able to bring the Night Sister bodies and skeletons, like, back to life, to fight for her, which is something introduced within the Clone Wars as a thing that they can do. There's a lot of necromancy involved in the Night Sisters, as per Lucas canon. But her magic, as you go forward and Merrin's character evolves, starts becoming less and less creepy. And it's just her magic. And even though it is still Night Sister magic, like, there's no indication that it's actually particularly evil or dark. It depends on how they utilize it. The Night Brothers have absolutely nothing added to them. They're just basic, like, enemies to kill. And there's no exploration of Merrin's relationship with them post-genocide, or what happens when she leaves the planet on her own at the end of the first game. Which is a little sad, because I think that we have, through Merrin and through Morgan Elspeth later, which we'll get to in a second, looked at the Night Sister genocide through the perspective of the Night Sisters, but we've never looked at the Night Sister genocide from the perspective of the Night Brothers, and how this would impact them. Like, did they leave? Like, they are freed now. Their slavers and oppressors are no longer there. Like, they can just potentially leave the planet, and there could be something really interesting to discuss there that never has been. And then, as Faye mentioned, they have shown up in things like the Ahsoka series, where we are actually introduced to Morgan Elspeth back in The Mandalorian, but they don't actually tell us that she's a Night Sister at the time. We don't find that out until the Ahsoka show. And there's this whole thing revealed, right, where the Night Sisters actually came from that galaxy. And when they like, travel now on Purgles, and somehow made their way into our galaxy, the galaxy far, far away, and landed on Dathomir, and then just took over Dathomir. Unclear. There's a lot of weird things that are getting added via Disney canon here in the Ahsoka show. Also, they don't seem to have green skin anymore.
Gray skin.
Yes, sorry, gray skin. There's no gray skin anymore. Very strange. It's just they're just kind of throwing shit at a wall, it feels like, with the Night Sisters, as opposed to doing anything particularly interesting with them.
Yeah, it kind of feels like they're just kind of making stuff up to make a cool story, and they're not pulling from an actual lore they have created.
Yeah, they're not trying to create, like, an interesting culture or an interesting character out of them. It's just like, oh, well, we need to do something weird and interesting. Let's just toss a Night Sister at it and say it's them. And it's like, but. And also, while we are on the topic of a waste of people's skills, the way we were back at the beginning of this was a waste of sci-fi empress Claudia Black.
Yes, it was.
It was such a waste of Claudia Black's skills, and I am so mad that they brought Claudia Black into Star Wars and made her like an expendable, completely makeup covered Night Sister, whatever she is, leader of some kind.
Mother, I think they call him.
Yeah, well, because Mother Talzin was a thing, but I don't know if anyway.
It feels like another instance of them saying, this is a cool aesthetic, what if we did something with it? And no one went further than that. They just said, Thrawn's here. They can help out Thrawn. Like, why? We don't know.
Right, they're both antagonists, but, like, anyway, even within the context of Clone Wars and the canon that has existed since then, it doesn't make a ton of sense for them to side with Thrawn. They are relatively neutral, even with regards to, like, the Sith and the Separatists thing that is happening in Clone Wars. They mostly just, like, they're out for their own preservation and their own agendas, for the most part. And I guess the idea is that they need help getting off this planet, and so they're siding with Thrawn because he's going to help them get off the planet. But, like, they presumably got off on their own before. Like, why can't they do it again? The Purgles are clearly still migrating there because Ahsoka uses them to get there. So it's like, why can't they get off on their own? Yeah. Do we want to talk about Tales of the Empire? Faye, this is gonna be entirely on you if you want to talk about it.
I mean, there's not really a whole lot in it. I mean, the only thing we learn in Tales of the Empire is that, like, the Night Sisters are not the only clan on the planet. There's apparently another clan in the mountains. But, like, it's not really explained if they're the same species or not, or if they practice the same thing of, like, using the Night Brothers as mates, or if they even really use magic. Like, they're supposed to be they, like, try and teach, what's her name?
Morgan Elsbeth. Morgan. They try and encourage Morgan to, like, let go of her past and, like, not be angry because she wants to revenge on the droids or something. But, like, that's kind of really it. Like, they didn't really go into, like, what this means for the planet, that there's more than one clan here. Like, maybe they were pulling from the actual book and being like, oh, actually, there's, like, multiple clans here, and the Night Sisters are just the evil ones. I don't think so. I think they were just, like...
That seems generous of you.
Yeah. This is real generous of me, and I don't know if I'm going to be that generous today, because more likely they were just like, we need someone for her to get killed so she can learn that she wants to keep being angry. Is probably more likely the case. But that's pretty much it. That's all there is to say about Tales of the Empire. Yeah, so it didn't add a lot. So the Night Sisters have popped up probably more than almost any other antagonist aside from, like, Palpatine or Anakin, in a number of different places, growing in some odd different directions. They're pretty much the antagonists when they don't want to use the Empire. They're like, who do we want? We want them to fight somebody, but we don't want them to fight regular Empire. Yeah, well, and if they just want something, like, magical, right? They need something magical and crazy, but they don't want it to be Sith, is usually where that goes. But speaking of the Empire, we're going to move on now to our last couple of villains who are going to be, like, Imperial officer characters. So our first one is the incomparable Wilf Tarkin. Not gonna lie, I do kind of love Tarkin. He's the worst, but I kind of love him. I mean, I can't judge, right? Like, I love Palpatine. Like, I mean, like, sometimes you just love a good 2D villain. He's just fun. He just looks evil. He just seems like he's really enjoying running a well-oiled machine that causes problems. He would look less evil if you could see his feet.
Sorry.
For context, oh god, I'm gonna lose a lot of points here for not remembering his name, but the actor who played Tarkin, Peter Cushing.
Mm-hmm. Well done.
Peter Cushing was a really tall dude, and he has very large feet, and so I believe he could not fit into the costume shoes that they gave him. So
they didn't have his size.
They didn't have his size, and they had no budget for anything for the original Star Wars. So the shoes were massively uncomfortable to wear. So quite often, if the shot was not going to show his feet, he was not wearing the damn shoes. He was wearing, like, fluffy pink slippers of some kind as he was walking.
He wore, like, house shoes from home.
Something like that, yeah. It's adorable. Peter Cushing apparently was an absolute delight of a human being. But yes, so that is the context for my comment about if you could see his feet, he wouldn't seem quite so evil. It was not a weird fetish thing, I promise. But Tarkin provides kind of a human enemy within the context of A New Hope. Because then he is someone who is able to be defeated in a way that Vader cannot. Vader is like this big space psychic wizard kind of villain. He's a lot more difficult to defeat, whereas Tarkin is just a guy. You know, he is an evil guy, but he is just a guy. It is possible to blow him up easy peasy. So it gives you this nice victory to have at the end. He does seem to have a lot of power within the Empire. He seems to order Vader around, and he's the one who does actually make the call to blow up Alderaan. Which also, I think, provides more catharsis to the victory at the end, because it is a defeat of this guy who seems to have a lot of evil power, you know? So it's like we've gotten rid of Tarkin, and he can no longer blow up planets. But you still have Vader as this kind of more interesting and more powerful in a different way kind of villain to defeat.
I think also, too, the fun thing about him is that he makes Vader more of a secondary antagonist, which is something that I always really like, because people often like blame Vader for the Alderaan blowing up, which is fair because he was there and did not stop it. He definitely shares blame, but Tarkin's the one who gives the order, and Tarkin's the one who's like is really gung-ho about like, we are gonna kill planets until people fall in line, like we are gonna blow up billions of people because that's gonna make people fear the Empire and obey. Like, he's really gung-ho about it, and I really like that they give us an antagonist to like really truly hate so they can build up the redemption arc with Vader. Like, it works really well. I really like how they did that.
Yeah, Tarkin's very, like... Vader is a very complex villain, and Tarkin's just not. Tarkin's just there to have fun with being evil.
Yeah.
And, like, sometimes people are just evil, and, like, that's the end of their story here.
Yeah, you know. And then to segue us into our next character, Tarkin also has a very memorable and very controversial appearance on Rogue One. Obviously, Peter Cushing, by the time of this film being filmed, which probably was somewhere around 2014, 2015, was very dead. So instead of recasting the role, they chose to go the route of creating him out of CGI. Hence the controversy. People had a lot of feelings about CGI Tarkin. So
I don't mind it, honestly. Like, I don't think it's that bad. My issue is that it's brought a rise of not doing any recastings ever, which is stupid.
Yeah.
I like recastings. I think in this particular case, I don't have an issue with it, but I don't like what it spawned.
yeah, and like you can tell, like people felt like it was really uncanny. There is, especially up against Krennic, who we will get to in a second, up against Krennic, who is very emotional all the time.
Yeah, he has a lot of emotions.
He has a lot of emotion, so you're seeing his face contort in so many ways, whereas Tarkin's face is very flat because he's CGI. Like, Tarkin was a pretty calm, reserved character, but, like, there is an element of it that is perhaps too reserved. There's not enough happening on his face, and it isn't helped by the fact that his counterpart, his primary counterpart, is doing a lot of things with his face. But you could argue there's not a lot of reason for Tarkin to be in this movie. You know, I don't know what his cameo is really adding to the story here. I kind of wrote that he seems to be there primarily just so that someone's there on the Death Star to blow up Scarif, rather than because Tarkin is actually necessary to this story being told.
I mean, I think it ties in really well to, like, Tarkin coming in and, like, I think it works to connect Rogue One to A New Hope, in that it gives you somebody who is actually in charge of the Death Star, like, actually building it, and then Tarkin coming in and being like, that's nice, this is mine now. So, like, you have somebody who's there for most of the movie that they can, like, fight against and then kill and defeat, but you don't have, like, a disconnect of, like, oh, how does it get from him into Tarkin's hands then? Because fanboys would be like, oh, it's such a plot hole spoiler or whatever. And, like,
But I feel like he could have just showed up at the end just to blow him up and just be like, oh yeah, Tarkin came. You know, like, I don't know. I don't think he needed to be there for the whole movie the way that he was.
Yeah, I think that they could have achieved the same thing with what they did with Leia. Like, you show up at the very end for a hot second to tie these things together, but other than that, he's not really necessary to the story in Rogue One.
Yeah. So, you know, controversial cameo by Tarkin in CGI in Rogue One. But this leads us very nicely into our final villain of this episode, which is Director Krennic. Who as stated briefly before, has a lot of emotions. He's got so many emotions.
So many emotions.
He's so awesome.
He's such a fun villain to have because he's just feeling everything all of the time. He doesn't seem to love being evil. He's just massively ambitious and, like, insecure as fuck. And this makes him very funny because he's just always trying to get everyone's approval, but ends up being, like, the most cringe-fail loser boy kind of character it is possible to be. And so he's just like...
And then he throws tantrums, and it's so fun.
He throws tantrums like
you
nobody's
actively
business.
want him to fail, but, like, at the same time, you're like, oh, I feel kind of bad for you, but also I hope you lose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that I ever feel bad for him. It's just like, you're an idiot. Like... And it does have, like, an interesting thing to say about the Empire a little bit within the context of Rogue One, right? That, like, the Empire is not necessarily mighty because the people running it are particularly smart. They're just, like, really fanatic and ambitious, and they do not care who gets in their way. They're particularly ruthless about it. You know, Krennic, for all that he is a cringe-fail loser boy, kills a lot of people. You know, he has absolutely no compassion for the people on Jeddah, and he is, like, very excited to see that thing go up. You know, he kills all those scientists on Edu just to send a message to Galen because he is so intent on proving his worth to the Emperor that he will kill anybody to get that approval. You know, he's just, like, completely irredeemable, but, like, in sometimes the most human of ways. And I kind of love that about Krennic.
Him and Cyril are really similar, but Cyril's way less competent.
To be fair, Cyril Karn from Andor, who we discussed briefly in the last episode of It All Connects to Anakin, because Cyril Karn has elements of his themes that connect to Anakin. That's why he was in that one. Karn, I think, you know, he is competent. He finds Cassian, like, he does actually accomplish that goal at the beginning. He just gets completely outmaneuvered when he tries to step out of that particular lane that he is good in. Whereas I think...
Yeah, I guess a better word would be less successful. Like, Krennic seems to be pretty successful at what he's trying to do.
Right, because Krennic understands he needs to surround himself with a lot of competent people.
Yes.
And so all those competent people manage to get his goals done. Like, he gets Galen Erso, right? He's like, we're so close, and he seems so in control of things when he shows up on whatever the planet is that they're staying on at the beginning of the film. And he's like, so he comes across so evil and so powerful in that moment because he clearly can tell that Galen is lying to him, you know, about Lyra, and he's never fazed by anything when it happens, which is so different from what he seems later on. Like, when we jump ahead 10 years in time, he's just, like, constantly shocked and betrayed by everything.
I think one of the things that I really like about Krennic is that, like, when Tarkin comes in and says, I don't give a shit about how much work you've put into this is mine now, it kind of contrasts, like, the community aspect of the rebellion, because the Empire doesn't care. Like, you are brutal, and so is everyone else. Like, you're not gonna find any sense of community here. Like, everyone is going to step on you regardless of what you've done for them in order to get ahead themselves. And, like, the rebellion is obviously, like, not perfect. Like, people are always going to be people, but I like that happens so, like, explicitly with Krennic. I like that he kind of falls and then kind of, like, flounders for a little bit at the end. And it's just like, well, shit, I used to be in power and now I don't know what to do. It's like, yeah, that sucks, dude. I guess you're going to die.
Yeah, he is such an interesting character to dislike, you know, like, in the context of him being a villain. Arguably one of the, I think probably the best written one, likely, on this list, of characters who are not particularly connected thematically to Anakin. I think he works the best. Yeah. Tarkin as well. I think we're ending on our best villains here. That they work the best within the purpose that they were created for. And with that, Faye, would you like to give us a goat fact?
I would love to give you a goat fact. Ghosts are foragers, not grazers. It's actually unnatural to graze or go on grass, and increases the likelihood of them picking up harmful parasites. In their natural habitat, they roam mountaintops and reach up as high as possible to pick out choice bits of forage around them.
I love that.
They
Good
don't
job,
like
goats.
to break.
Well done.
They like to forage.
They're such hard workers.
They're such hard workers.
Our intro and outro music is Mos Eisley Cantina by Speedkicks. Angela and I edit, our artwork is by me, and Sugar is our writer and researcher. You can find us on Instagram and Tumblr at Unleash the Goats. Thanks for listening.